Okay, why don't we get started? Welcome to the Regional Stormwater Partnership of the Carolinas Post-Construction Stormwater Compliance Winter Workshop. The workshop will last for approximately 2 hours. You can go to the next slide, please. And the next, thank you. So the Regional Stormwater Partnership has existed for quite a few years. We currently have 22 municipality members centered in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg region, metropolitan region. Our mission is to educate and bring awareness to the public, local businesses, and education centers of our region about stormwater issues and their impact on water quality and our environment. We further aim to unite local stormwater programs by sharing information and ideas in order to discuss and address similar stormwater issues on a regional level. So we do a lot of different things throughout the year. One of the main benefits and goals of the RSPC is to do an outreach and education program, and a lot of different activities to help our municipality members meet requirements in their municipal stormwater permit. We have several different workshops and seminars throughout the year. This is one of them, one of our tech talks. We usually hold a couple during the year, and then occasionally have an elected officials workshop, which we are planning for the springtime, I believe. So look for that later on. Next slide. So we have a pretty full agenda. We'll have 5 speakers, each speaking for approximately 20 minutes, and then a 10-minute question and answer session at the end. Next slide. I'm sorry, go back. So I'm going to read the topics of the presentation. So the first one will be bridging the post-construction knowledge gap with real estate professionals and homeowner associations, followed by options for getting SCM owners into compliance other than the usual measures of notices of violations and fines, dealing with site restrictions when designing and installing stormwater control measures, followed by performing comprehensive underground SCM inspections and maintenance, and finally, water quality enhancements for stormwater ponds. And we want to thank all of our presenters and you as well, our participants, for being here today. So in order, the presentations will be delivered by Bob Clay, who's with Coldwell Banker MCA, James Misiano with the town of Apex, North Carolina, Alessandria Eason with Hazen and Sawyer, Sean Mayo with Gavel and Dorn Engineering, and Cole Hewlin with Foster Lake and Pond Management. So thank you to all of you for helping us out today. So it's an interactive webinar as far as asking questions. You are muted. We have, I believe, close to 500 people that registered, and that is why it's tough to allow people to, have access to the microphone when there are that many people. So we've muted everybody, but you are able to put questions. We ask that you put them in the Q&A feature and not so much the chat box. And then those the Q&A feature can be used to answer the questions, track which ones have been answered, and then prioritize them. And then in addition, as I mentioned, we will have a question and answer session at the end to answer some additional questions that haven't been answered. PDHs and certificates of attendance are available. For this one will be 2 hours. You will need to be present for the entire workshop, and Zoom tracks your attendance. You will need to log in with the same email as you registered for the workshop. And then after the workshop, complete the form on page 5 of the program that is on our website. and email that to regina.geyer@risingsolutionsplllc.com. I'll show this again at the end. And then a certificate of attendance and PDH verification will be emailed to you. Okay, let's get started. So our first presenter is Bob Clay, who's going to be, presenting about bridging the post-construction knowledge gap with real estate professionals and HOAs. Bob has overseen numerous real estate developments throughout the Carolinas that include residential, commercial, and hotel projects. He has also completed numerous multi-million-dollar commercial investment real estate transactions on behalf of his clients. Before organizing a commercial real estate company in 1978 in Michigan, he was an Army officer that's having served in Vietnam. And upon his discharge, he joined Xerox Corporation, where he rose to the position of National Accounts Manager. Moved to Charlotte, North Carolina in 1981, where he formed a commercial investment real estate company. He later joined Mecca Properties as VP of Development and collaborated on Olmsted Park, if you've heard of that, in Charlotte, one of the first mixed-use infill development and development of the Grandover Resort, which many of you have probably seen near Greensboro, North Carolina, right off of 85. And then he joined Farr Yarns in 1993 as their director of real estate operations and was responsible for numerous development projects on their behalf until he founded Clay Realty Advisors in 2004. And he has many other accolades and awards and is involved very much in his community. So we're very appreciative and lucky to have him here today. So with that, we'll get started with Bob.
Thank you, Craig, and good morning, everyone. When my good friend Joe Gates with the town of Lowell asked me to be involved with a conversation about stormwater and so forth, I readily agreed to do so, thinking that there'd probably be some 20 to 25 people in a small chat group. So it's impressive that you've ended up with 500 of you or so out there, and I hope what I have to tell you may be worthy of your time. My whole presentation is conversational as opposed to slides. The technical things that will be shared with you later by my peers here on this quorum will be plenty. So what I'm going to do is talk to you a little bit, having been involved as a developer, as an owner, dealing with the creation of homeowner association and property owner association documents. I think I can share with you some ideas, having looked at your questions, particularly about communication and being involved with associations and association managers, which have become prevalent in most recent years. So I've got to tell you, it's my belief that this knowledge gap that we're trying to deal with can really only be influenced by the involvement in pre-construction process. For all of you that are the authority and enforcement position officials, to have an influence in post-construction process, all these relationships and transfer of knowledge must be developed really early on. If the plat is recorded, that means the site infrastructure construction is complete and approved by the municipality. That also means that the HOA/POA documents have been recorded and the deed restrictions are in place. At that point, the cows have left the barn. So it's really too late for your involvement if you don't get involved early on. In my area, regionally, we have the great pleasure of dealing with Joseph Alm, who heads Gaston County's Department of Natural Resources. What my development group and team has come to understand is that Joseph is very much, and his team is very much about compliance, but he's also very much about common sense. You know, his responsibility to oversee deficiencies or oversights is very important. oftentimes, developer guys and gals don't really know that they're not doing something properly. So, that conversation is so important for you to have with them, as I say, at a common sense level, as opposed to the violation and fine level. A lot can be solved early on. So with the chance of being way too rudimentary for this group, or the majority of your group, I want to walk through a real estate transaction kind of from the beginning. I think it's important that you understand what a group has gone through, or what a development team has gone through to get to a place where you are really being involved. So let's presume for a second that a property has gone under contract, and during their examination period, which is normally somewhere in a commercial deal, and when I say commercial deal, I mean residential site development is really a commercial deal. And now with all the hybrids that have come about of mixed use developments, you really can end up with a master property owner association with many subs, actually with different developers within it. So it becomes very complicated when you're dealing with these sorts of developments. But at this point, let's presume that we've put a property under contract, gone through the examination period somewhere between 90 and 180 days. Normally they get extensions on these things through the contractual period as well. Buyer has done a phase 1 environmental evaluation, completed an ALTA survey, commenced with a geotechnical study, and their civil engineer or landscape architect has completed a preliminary site plan. At this point, they've hired a land use attorney of Mebane municipality with an initial response that their plan meets the long-range comprehensive plan. These are things that I presume you all are aware of. They are sometimes shocking to me as to the types of land uses that they've come up with for certain areas. However, that's my commentary. So let's say that they're encouraged to move on to remove the property, to rezone the property, excuse me. And in today's world, we deal with, I'm going to say 99% conditional developments. The time of use by right is a thing of the past. So what's happened is that even though most council folks or planning board folks are not really professionals in any particular, they're a diverse group of folks who have great meaning and great intent, but oftentimes have no idea of anything about the land development process. So it's always curious to me when we go before these boards that you get all these personal little things that they want put into these projects. So you end up with a land plan that's been done by professionals. They come in, the land planning professionals and the land use attorneys, they know that there's going to be, if you will, many comments to be added to their plan. So that's kind of all, it's somewhat built in. But so the negotiations really begin at that point. That's where you have met with planning staff. They've put all of their accoutrements on the development, and now they're ready to be presented to a planning board. The planning board, let's presume that they also think it's a good process, and the planning board says, okay, let's move it on to council. When you get to council, they too then still have the authority and the right, when the conditional zoning process, to add on their issues. So, the one thing that I didn't mention before that's become relevant in development process is also what's called a TIA, a traffic improvement analysis. These TIAs not only evaluate what impact the site will have directly, but it also goes to other areas. It might be as much as a mile or up to 5 miles away from the particular development that a developer may have to make improvements to intersections, sidewalks, any number of things, turning lanes, etc. So it's not these TIAs, the municipalities hire either one or multiple entities, professionals to do these studies. They, at one time, not in a very distant past, what was a figure around $8,000 to $10,000. They now are $25,000 to $40,000, just as a point of understanding. So at this point, let's say council has also now approved the conditional plan. All the things have been met, everything's on the plan, all the buffers, all the landscape, and all the issues that were important to these folks are there, and the developer has agreed to do that. At this point, somewhere between 9 months and a year and a half would have passed. $80,000 to $250,000 would have been spent, depending on the size of the development, without the first shovel of dirt being moved. Additionally, the property probably hasn't transferred yet. A new phenomenon that seems to have gone on is that the developer, if you will, the ultimate buyer, let's say it's a Ryan or a Pulte or whoever it may be, in a residential development, they have now decided that they want to pass on to the owner the interest carry cost. Used to be when we got to the zoning and council said yes, the property closed. Now what is going on is the contractual agreements have been changed to say that the property will close when all approvals have been received by all municipalities, meaning construction documents would have been totally completed at that time. And effectively they can close on Wednesday and go out and start moving dirt on Thursday. So that's where we are at that point. Now, this is where I think the technical side of your world needs to start getting involved. I know it's really early on, but you all know that as soon as we get to a point where it's a residential or commercial development, the first thing that's got to happen is a soil erosion plan gets submitted to the municipality. So, and also you're going to know exactly who the responsible party is. So you're going to have a plan that shows where all the temporary and permanent, and I guess we really want to talk about the permanent SEMs are located. They're going to have been designed. There's going to be an understanding of where this thing is going to be when the project is complete. With that information, I think there's a real opportunity for those of you in this audience that are in the maintenance and actual doing of the work to keep the ponds in compliance. It's an opportunity, possibly even another income opportunity, to get involved and reach out to the responsible parties to help them understand what that pond specifically may cost. Because when developers see site development costs, their soil erosion control line item expense is going to include everything from riprap to construction fencing to you name it. It doesn't really have what pond A costs. Moreover, it won't say what pond A costs to maintain, whether it's quarterly, annually, or whatever. I know that there have been, over the last probably 7, 8, 10 years, there have been numerous companies that have evolved to do nothing but take care of these stormwater ponds and to make sure that the plants are right and everything is done correctly. So I'm saying that there's an opportunity here to help with the budgeting process. I'm going to get to that in just a second. So at this point, the developer, whoever it is going to not only control the HOA or the POA board, but it's also going to have the responsibility that the developer of this product, whether it end up being like some builders do their own self-development. Most builders in today's world want to put the property under contract, and then they want a certain amount of the lots delivered over a number of phases. In a larger, let's say it's 200 lots, they're going to want to do 60 lots at a time and phase the project as it's developed. But my point is that whether it's the builder, self-developer, or the developer that's that is doing it for a builder, they are in fact writing the POA, HOA document. They are also having to create a budget for those covenants, conditions, and restrictions that they are building. The other thing that happens within all of this is that the process of managing the HOA POA is normally handled by professionals these days. Rarely does a developer want to manage and deal with individual homeowners through a HOA. So there's going to be a point of reaching out and trying to understand, get bids, all those kinds of things from professional management companies. I'm not familiar with anything that's been done in the recent past where a professional management company hasn't been involved. It's just so hard to deal with the minutia that comes out of a residential community from the perspective of homeowners. So, that's kind of where that is. Now, let me talk about the budgeting a little bit. When I've been involved with creating POA documents and using really bright counsel to help me with all of that, the one thing that comes out of all that is the requirement for a preliminary budget. In other words, if you don't have a budget, it's impossible to know what the end homeowner is going to end up paying monthly, quarterly, annually, whatever it may be, however those are done. The more complex developments where you may have mixed uses, those are normally going to be more of a monthly kind of a thing. But if I could make an analogy, when we do a budget, there's two pieces. There's capital budget, capital item budgets, and then there are ongoing annual repair and maintenance budgets. So they're combined, but there are two different categories. In capital side, that's where I think an SCM probably belongs. It's going to belong in the repair piece too. But to make an analogy, let's say that a development has private alleyways for a rear-loaded garage product. So that alleyway has got to be measured. It's got to be determined exactly what its cost is and what its life would be. Let's say that alleyway is determined that it's for me, let's say it's $100,000 cost for the alleyway. And let's say that it's understood that it's a 20-year life. So I know I've got $5,000 a year that I've got to put away in a sinking fund to provide for that alleyway's replacement. Now, there's also going to be a budget for potholes, cracks, resurfacing, other minor pieces that would go into an annual budget. So those two things have got to be there. Now, this is where I was referring to earlier, would be fantastic for people who do the maintenance, the physical maintenance of these SCMs, to get involved with the developer to help them with that budget. Because otherwise, for me, it's always real easy to deal with the hard costs. But when you're dealing with something that we're really not that familiar with, and a line item is normally not drawn to it, it would be fantastic to have that kind of input. So what I'd say is the last thing you need to understand is that the developer or builder remains in control of the HOA POA until a recognized within the CC&Rs threshold is met. Normally that's going to be when 75% of the homes are built, the responsibility turns over to the HOA board. Now, this board is another group of well-minded people that know nothing about running anything. So, that's why this professional management association kicks in. You as professionals that are going to be dealing with compliance, it's so important that you know exactly who these POAs are because that's who you really are going to need to deal with. So what I'm saying is, through this whole thing, I think it requires for you to get on the knowledge gap fix, you've got to take responsibility to help with that. And your involvement is going to be extremely important at the very early stage in really the infrastructure development side and that whole piece of the pie. So that really is the end of my conversation. I hope it's helpful. I am going to have to step off this call at 10, but I will be happy to answer any questions that you may have through the Q&A. I understand it's going to be available for me. And so thank you so much for your attention. And I hope that it's been helpful. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Bob. That was very helpful. We really appreciate your time spent with us today, sharing your knowledge and after many years of experience and lots of different projects. We appreciate you staying around till, like you said, 10, and maybe some questions will pop up in the Q&A related to what you were talking about. So thanks again. So we will move on to our second presentation, which is options for getting SCM owners into compliance, with James Misiano. I'm going to read a little bio about James. Just a second. Okay. James has been managing stormwater and environmental programs for 11 years with expertise in NPDES Phase 2 compliance and hazmat response and remediation. He has been working for the town, town of Apex Stormwater Engineering Department for several years. And he has certifications as CES and CPESC. So we will turn things over to James. I believe he's going to share his screen. There we go.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Can everybody hear me? So, as he mentioned, I am James Misiano. I work for the town of Apex. We are a southwestern suburb of Raleigh. We're currently around 80,000 people. We have seen overwhelming development over the last several years. And with overwhelming development comes the obstacles of compliance. So that is what I'm going to talk about here today, is how do we get compliance without the enforcement actions, issuing NOVs, stop work orders, things of that nature. So let's get started. Okay. So you will see I'm very fortunate here to have a team of several people. I understand with this presentation today that there may be individuals wearing many hats, but I'm very fortunate. We have engineers on our staff. We have environmental specialists on our staff. We have environmental scientists on our staff. We also even have a new stormwater coordinator. As we have a stormwater utility, this is a position that we recently acquired. And as we are talking about compliance, for those of you who have a stormwater utility, you may see the benefit in getting compliance here with post-construction. And if you don't, that might be something as a program or jurisdictional agency that you might look to get in the future. So I am going to start off this presentation with communications and presence, because honestly, I believe that is the most important thing in getting compliance. In my 10 years of managing programs, I have found that constant communications is what brings compliance more than anything else. And it is a little bit in a reverse order as far as, the process with files and everything coming in first, but we're going to start with communications. So the ability and willingness to communicate with, owners, property management companies, maintenance companies, design teams, contractors is definitely what is key. One of the things I like to talk about all the time, whether it's from a pre-construction meeting or just meeting with people that fall under our jurisdictional agency, is we're all about compliance. We're not about enforcement. Compliance is what our whole entire goal is, right? Where if you have to enforce things on people all the time, And I know for the jurisdictional groups out there, you know, the people we answer to do like to see, you know, us checking these boxes. They do like to see high numbers maybe with enforcement actions, notices of violations, stop work orders. But, you know, I would like to mention that if you have to issue a lot of NOVs and stop work orders, that sort of means you're not in compliance in the first place. So I like to focus on compliance over enforcement. Now, I understand that enforcement is needed to get compliance at times, but you know, think about having a solid field presence, you know, building relationships, you know, having these calls on the telephone, having emails and meetings. I do find them to be more effective in most cases than issuing a notice of violation. And we'll go quickly into stop work orders, because for those of you who enforce programs like I do, we all do know that the stop work order does work pretty much better than anything out there. You know, things really get moving when a stop work order is issued. But what does it take to issue that stop work order? You know, every one of us has a different chain of command. We have different sequencing on what we need to do before we issue one, you know, within our municipalities. But, you know, whether you're working as an individual managing stormwater programs, or there's 15 people managing stormwater programs, sometimes to issue a stop work order does require a lot of time. You know, whether you're dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's, whether you're verifying property ownership, you're verifying all the history, it may take hours for you to issue a stop work order. Excuse me. And you may also need executive approval to issue that stop work order. Maybe a director, a town manager. And here's another thing I want you all to keep in mind. What are the effects to the other departments you may have when you issue a stop work order? You know, many stormwater meetings and conferences I go to, people just can't wait to levy a stop work order. Well, if you're a municipality like us, and many of you listening today are, you have this extremely high rate of development. Well, here in the town of Apex, if we were to go ahead and issue a stop work order on a site, that's going to shut down infrastructure inspections. It's going to shut down planning departments. It's going to shut down our building and inspections departments. I understand that's the tool you're using, but what have you done to these other departments? You know, many of them are doing hundreds of residential inspections a day. How can they effectively manage their time with hundreds of inspections going on? Not to mention, they might not know when you're going to release the stop work order. So I understand the stop work order may be the last tool that many of you use, but there are also some of you out there who will issue them right away. So for me, I do everything I can not to issue a stop work order or even a notice of violation, because with the time constraints, when you're issuing a notice of violation, even something as simple as that, I have here snail mail, right? Of course, many of us understand due diligence periods with the people that we answer to, you know, whether it's the state or the EPA. If you have an issue on a site, whether it's a failing SEM, whether you have impacts, you know, you could have structural impact, dam failure, things of that nature that are serious. At that time, you're going to issue notices of violations and wait for them to go out, you know, a signature receipt. It might take 4 to 10 days before they even get those. Yeah, and also let's keep in mind, maybe 40% of those never even reach their final destination. You're waiting on a response before you send out another one. So, you know, for me, with my staff, whenever we have an issue, whether it's a post-construction SEM or it's active construction projects, as soon as there is a failure, especially with impacts or a lack of compliance, first thing we're going to do is we're going to call somebody. And that's why you have to have that willingness to communicate. The minute you call someone, you tell them there are serious issues going on, they're looking to start work quickly. And that's way faster than 10 to 15 days waiting on, you know, emails and things of that nature, or a response from a, you know, certified mail. And here's another thing that I think is extremely important, is your wording, you know. So for many of you out there, like myself, might manage other programs within your phase 2 permits, right? Like, you know, illicit discharges, sediment erosion, you know, things of that nature. well, even on the post-construction side of things, we do know that owners, you know, in companies, even people doing certification inspections, but developers, a lot of them understand our protocols. They understand how our system works. And when you word things simply like, well, we may issue a notice of violation, or even we're going to issue a notice of violation, they understand that it is a notice. And it's going to come with a time period for corrective actions, right? Or you may say things like, well, you did not pass inspection, or you're out of compliance. You know, the truth is, a lot of these seasoned professionals out there that are in the business, they're not really worried about violation notices or timelines. So when they see that in an email, or they finally get one, they understand the people they're answering to, their time constraints that come with it. So I change things up. I find, you know, it's better to say things like, you are in violation. I actually put that right in the subject line when I'm sending out an email to someone. It'll say something like violation, Smith site, ABC, or, you know, Smith site violation. I want the owner, or whoever the responsible party is, when they get that email right away, before maybe a phone call, that they're like, that's what they see, violation. Okay, and your notice of violation is a type of violation. And I also like here where you see I have enforcement actions will be issued. I love this one because although, like I mentioned, we have seasoned professionals out there, they typically work with multiple municipalities, even in different states. So they don't know the details of your development ordinance or what your protocols are. So when they do see an email or something on an inspection report that says enforcement actions will be issued, they're not 100% sure about what you're talking about. And it just might prompt them to do things a lot quicker because they might feel they're getting a civil penalty. They don't know what the timeframes are and what the process is for you to issue a civil penalty. So I feel that things like that work to your advantage as if you are enforcing programs. And here's another one, stop work immediately. Okay, I hear this one a lot. It may make some people nervous, but I honestly will tell people, stop work immediately. Stop work on site without issuing a stop work order. Now, if this is something you're concerned with, if there's something you feel is prohibiting you from saying that, then maybe you want to talk to legal counsel, or if you have a legal team or something like that. But if you are enforcing something and your job is to protect the surface waters, even if you're in a primary watershed like we have, and there are impacts, do you want to send out something in the mail, or do you want to be contacting someone and say immediately, hey, stop work? And I honestly, in 10 years of doing this, I've never had someone say, no, we're not. Issue me a stop work order. So you might want to look into some of that. Some of these tools work. So as far as Apex goes, post-construction here, we do have dedicated personnel to post-construction, which is great. So, of course, there's the process of you have your sediment basins, everything gets converted. Well, we follow the whole conversion process from A to Z, and we perform our own in-house inspections on all converted BMPs, SCMs, things that we're going to accept into our inventory. And I think this is critically important to compliance, in perpetuity, because when as a municipality that it was built correctly, there's no arguments moving down the road with different teams or inspectors and maintenance companies. So for us, the as-built package comes in, our engineers, run all the calcs, make sure everything is good to go. They will actually green light the field inspection team, and we will perform an as-built inspection on all recently converted SCMs. Another thing that we do too is we have financial holds. We have financial holds all day long. So when it comes to something that's going through the conversion process, we have two holds right off the bat. We have a performance hold and a maintenance hold. Our performance hold is 125% of the total cost to build that BMP or that SCM. And our maintenance that we have is 25% of that. So we don't release the maintenance hold on a accepted BMP unless it passes the first annual inspection, And when we have the first annual inspection that comes in, whether it's third party, we also have our field staff go out and verify that that SEM that was built a year ago is functioning as intended. We want to make sure that it's not all eroded, lots of bare soil areas. We want to make sure the infrastructure is working properly, it's dewatering properly, things of that nature. And one of the biggest things is the plants. Many of you out there know, well, as soon as that responsibility is passed over to the HOA, and a year later they have a BMP that's not functioning as they wished, or all the plants are dead, they want to know, how come you all accepted it? They throw that liability right back on the jurisdiction. So I think that is something that's really key. So also, when it comes to SEMs, when you are scheduling your recently converted SEM for your schedule, right? What month do you want those annual certifications to come in? Schedule, your constructed wetlands and your wet ponds in the growing season, even if it's not 12 months from, when you accepted it. I think it's extremely important that when third-party inspectors, throughout the life of the project, are looking at these SEMs and seeing the plants and everything that's supposed to be in there, right? It just reduces the amount of questions and things that come in. And it is better to see that annual certification come in with all the plantings and stuff that is supposed to be there. So we are very fortunate in Apex. Like I said, we do have a dedicated staff member that performs our inspections. So most, I'm very familiar with phase 2 permits. I can't really speak to some of the other permitting that are out there and what the requirements are, but most phase 2 permits do require in-house inspections every 5 years by the jurisdiction. So, some municipalities may do 20% a year, things of that nature. But here in Apex, we have found a new level of service, by having we have a senior environmental specialist that basically owns our post-construction program. And he is looking at every single facility that we have. And currently you'll see here, we have 520. He's looking at every single one of them every year, annually. And that has brought us a level of service that we have not had since we received our phase 2 permit. It has been extremely advantageous. One of the benefits of it is he'll perform these inspections 30 to 60 days before they're due. And by doing that, one, he's verifying the third-party inspections that come in, making sure they're accurate. But also, two, because we have a great communication with all these owners and property managers, when he sees something that's out of line or there's a serious issue, especially if there's something that's impacting our water quality, he has a contact list. He knows who the HOA reps are. He knows who the property management companies are. And at that point in time, he's contacting them saying, hey, we have some serious issues out here. And again, this is prior to it being due. So if you're hitting them up 30 to 60 days prior to the due date, one of the benefits are they're fixing it and you're receiving a past inspection. And for those of you who are juggling 500 SEMs, 1,000 SEMs, 2,000 SEMs, you really want a past inspection coming in. You don't want a failed one, because now then your time management again. Now you're following, okay, this one had failed. What type of extension are we giving them? Is it 30 days, 60 days, the follow-ups? It is better to have a past inspection come in. So it has done wonders for us. And again, I understand we're fortunate to have dedicated staff that we can, put on these type of things, and many of you don't. But I just want to mention the benefits of performing these inspections annually. So I'm going to burn through this quickly, as I know I'm crunched on time here. So for us, the town of Apex, we do require for our annual certifications a licensed professional. I understand many may have like SEM, maintenance and repair certifications from universities and things of that nature. For us, we put the liability on professional engineers, landscape architects, and licensed surveyors. Also, one of the things that we do that I think is great, from the minute we record an operations and maintenance agreement, an O&M agreement, part of it is we do require annual maintenance. It can be monthly, it can be quarterly, but it is written in the O&M agreement that is recorded with the county. So we require that as part of the certification process here in Apex. They have to submit that with their annual certification. If they do not, they fail. So all third-party inspectors that are submitting annual certifications to the town of Apex know that it requires maintenance. And if they did not send the routine maintenance, we're going to mandate and make sure that they do it next year. Because the last thing you want, and many of you will, I'm sure you will agree, when you have these certification programs, is when do they start really making sure it's in compliance? 30 days or 2 weeks prior to their inspection. That's when they'll go out and have some pond maintenance company or landscaper go out there and do all this work on that SEM. Well, we want to ensure that they're doing it year round, because again, that's what's best for our water quality. And our goal is, water quality and compliance. So we mandate that they perform maintenance. And most of the SEMs too here, when you have an O&M agreement, what I wanted to mention is make sure you have it per SEM, not a broad O&M agreement that covers 13 different types of SEMs. Because when you make it specific, the people who are really not in tune with stormwater, who may be reading these O&Ms, are realizing what their responsibilities are. Because the requirements to keep a bioretention cell and a constructed wetland in compliance may be completely different from each other, right? So we also require, right from the beginning, O&M agreements, of course, on every SEM, construction plans, landscaping plans, planting lists, and of course the as-built supplements and certification packages when things are done, after they've been converted. So all these documents are key to compliance because, as you'll see, I'll talk about in the next slide, is people are always requesting this information throughout the life of these SEMs. So I call this the one-stop shop. So honestly, here at the town of Apex, because we've had such dramatic growth over the last several years, keeping up with the amount of SEMs that we have has been overwhelming to the point where we've had to dedicate someone, like I've mentioned. You may have files everywhere. You may have construction files in one place. You might have inspection files and ownership files here and there. You might have spreadsheets in different locations tracking different things. And so for us, we're currently working with a private company to develop a stormwater database. And we really want a one-stop shop here. We want to be able to just keep it simple as much as possible. But when we get a telephone call, whether it's an HOA person or a resident, or people just requesting information, inspectors, certs, maintenance companies, we want to be able to go to Smith site ABC, pull that up, see the owner's information, the property management's information. Of course, we're talking about contact information here. Telephone numbers, emails, things of that nature. We want to be able to easily access all that information. We want to be able to easily edit that information as these people change with the wind sometimes, management companies and stuff. But for me, what's most important, because I understand how much time is involved with it, is having your documents all in that same location. So when you do get that call, you can easily pull up an O&M agreement. You can pull up your construction plans, your as-built package, even the landscaping plans and planting list. For me, having all of that in one spot is key to compliance, because as your facilities grow, you're going to have so many people requesting that information on a regular basis. It's so much better to not write their information down and tell them you're going to get back with them later, because you got to pull all this information from multiple files. Now you can go right to your database, pull up the SEM, everything you can drag and write into an email. So something to keep in mind. So near the end here, of course, public information and outreach is another key to compliance for post-construction. Truth is, a lot of people have these stormwater ponds and things throughout their neighborhoods. Most of them don't even know that there's a stormwater feature. So when you're working, to have a good website right off the bat, I think is key. And one that people can easily find. It prevents a lot of different telephone calls going to different departments before they actually get to yours to get information. So have some good general information on what SEMs are, what their function is. For us, we have actual SEM inspectors and repair contractor lists on our website. This may save us some telephone calls that we get. People will look on the website and and be like, oh, wow, here are some, people that we can call to repair or inspect our facilities. So I think that's extremely important. Meeting with HOAs and property owners on educating them what their responsibilities are, and how these SEMs function. A lot of these people who volunteer their time to be on HOA boards, and most of us know how brutal that is. These are people who typically want to learn things, and they know they want that education dropped on them. So when they know and understand the function of these SEMs, they're happy to educate other HOA members as they come on board. Most of them will happily speak to it during HOA board meetings. But when you educate owners, property managers on their responsibilities, it aids in compliance, and also letting them know, of course, avenues they can use to reference what you have, i.e. the website and things of that nature. So I know I sort of rapid fired through that. It was intentional. It's a lot of information. It's a short period, but this does conclude my presentation. I will mention that anything that you do put in the Q&A, I'll do my best to answer with the time that I have. And I thank you very much again. I do appreciate you all inviting me to be here.
All right. Thank you, James. Sorry that I know you wish to talk longer because you have a lot of great information to share and gave people some really good options to think about and try out. So we appreciate that. And I'm sure there'll be some good questions that people put in the Q&A. So we'll move to our third presentation, keep rolling. And the next one is titled Dealing with Site Restrictions when Designing and Installing SCMs. And our presenter is Alessandria Eason with Hazen and Sawyer. I'm going to read a little bio for her. Alessandria is a licensed professional engineer with Hazen and Sawyer. She currently serves as one of their lead engineers for green infrastructure and overall stormwater improvements. Her expertise focuses on localized and area-wide planning, design, tracking, monitoring, and implementation of stormwater controls. She has played a key role in Hazen and Sawyer's stormwater management efforts throughout the U.S., including prominent green infrastructure initiatives in New York City, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., and Boston. So we'll turn it over to you when you're ready.
Thank you. You see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yes, so I'll be talking about dealing with site restrictions when designing and installing SCMs. One thing that I think you'll see and have seen already with post-construction is kind of everything regarding site restrictions, SCMs, what do you look at post-construction ultimately comes back to maintenance. So we'll look at just the different SCM green infrastructure programs, how those are categorized, feasibility assessments and opportunity tracking within those. You just heard James talk about kind of the tracking and database that they're trying to implement for Apex, design standardization, and then proactive maintenance considerations. So when we think of green infrastructure SCM programs, we can kind of divide them into three main categories. So an ultra urban or large scale implementation, urban and suburban. What those environments are able to accomplish and what their goals are generally fall into either combined sewer overflows, MS4 water quality improvements, or merely just drainage improvements. Drilling down further into these, it's important to realize that some of the main characteristics that may set them apart. So for example, an urban or a suburban focused program may not have the impacts that are as substantial, but they also may not have extensive amounts of funding to be able to focus on stormwater alone, where a larger or an ultra urban focused program would generally be more limited in space to implement SCMs, but they would have more impacts where they actually need to be able to mitigate stormwater issues. Additionally, some of these larger programs may have larger funding sources to pull from. So it's a really, balance of trying to accomplish their goals with, what resources you have in front of you. So when we think about constraints, kind of the full plethora of options. or things that, regardless of if you're a small program or a large program, a smaller suburban style city or something, in the heart of Charlotte, looking at, utilities. Some of these utilities have been there for decades and decades, and then others are new. And how does that focus or, fill in with capital planning? So understanding programmatic uses, what existing soils are there, drainage areas, to be able to make sure that any SCM that's implemented is feasible from a cost-effective standpoint, and being able to navigate these constraints is often a combination of green infrastructure, SCMs, gray infrastructure, and then the programmatic use. So it's really pairing the constraint to the solution. So we plan, we organize, and then we design, because that format generally sets us up for long-term implementation, regardless of the size of your program. So for larger programs, they may already have more established program goals. And so they've already taken a look at, what types of information are we interested in? Where do we need to be able to come back to look at, okay, we've already looked up this entire neighborhood and these are our only options. So being able to look and track potential green infrastructure or SCM opportunities with information that would allow you to understand, why you could or could not place an SCM in that area. So identifying those constraints, looking at the characteristics, and tracking that in a meaningful way that will allow you to maximize your implementation to accomplish your program goals. When you look at a smaller scale, an urban or suburban programs, you may not have the resources or database to be able to track, or maybe you don't want to track in that manner, but being able to just keep record of areas that you've already visited, what those constraints were, even if that's filing those away based on an individual neighborhood. And this was kind of an example of a neighborhood in rural Virginia that didn't have stormwater infrastructure. And so understanding, what were the options that they have available in their green infrastructure or SCM toolbox, and then being able to, just maybe with a simple Excel style database, weight and prioritize different characteristics of those SCMs in order to prioritize cost-effective implementation, kind of take care of that low-hanging fruit first. So we have all the information. We know where we can put different SCMs, but we still have these constraints. We still have these challenges. Maybe it's steeper slopes on a road that has a lot of space for an SCM, and you can put something within the right of way. Or, we have an area within a very urban part of our community, but there's a lot of utilities. So what do you do in order to capture the volume that you're designing for? And that's really coming up with different design variations. So whether it's splitting the practice and hydraulically connecting it subsurface, and also, if you have an area with high slopes, planning for putting stone check dams under the within the subsoil and stone to be able to manage more water than, if you didn't have that, and standardizing those small details around different configurations to look at each of the constraints individually. From there, it's continuing to adapt the design elements. So, many municipalities and localities have kind of their toolbox of options, but understanding that it might not be a one size fits all. You might have an area where, because of the elevations, an under drain is not feasible, or maybe because of the plethora of utilities, an under drain is not feasible. So looking at ways that you can provide that passive inflow outflow, while also considering, where this is going to be located. Is it going to be highly visible to the public eye? Those types of things. Design standardization may look different at a larger scale. We've worked with programs in the past that, wanted true design details where you have typical dimensions, so that whether you're doing capital planning or a private developer comes in and is required to implement an SEM as part of their development, they already have set options that can streamline the design process. They're already set in terms of, widths that are approved, lengths that are approved, and anything outside of that would need special approval. Predetermining planting schemes based on surroundings. So, maybe within a certain area of the city or community, that these are the types of plants that work. These are the planting schemes that work. Predetermining those also allows for a faster review and more consistent maintenance over time. And then outlining the typical constraints and what potential adaptations are that the city or municipality is comfortable with. So, you'd see in this bottom figure, looking at a utility lateral that may be splitting to roadside bioretention, but the roadside bioretention are hydraulically connected subsurface, either with stone or the use of stone and an underdrain. Another way that we've seen maximizing volume capture is using an iceberg infrastructure approach for that additional capture. So these work well within right-of-way areas, and especially in areas where you may be depth limited from an excavation standpoint. It allows you to maintain the surface space that you have and limits the surface maintenance requirements. You have less area for trash to get into. And so, taking this approach where you may have a smaller surface footprint, but expanding the subsurface footprint. And here you can see the use of chambers and stone that extends out into the parking area, or maybe it extends out underneath the sidewalk. That allows you to maximize your capture, but reduce the footprint where you may have pedestrian traffic. Similar type of adjustment would be adapting green infrastructure or SCMs within constrained corridors. Part of this also leads into communicating with the contractor. Not every contractor is familiar with newer SCM designs or how to go about working within constrained corridors. So it's communicating that early, making sure that within our designs, we're considering what the amount of space that would be needed. You can see the picture on the left, trees are very close by. We want to protect those trees. So communicating with the contractor, what is to be protected and what are the best ways that they could help the city protect those trees while also accomplishing their stormwater goals. Now, a full set of design details may not be, or design standardization may not be as warranted for a smaller urban or suburban program, but being able to generalize different design guidelines can also help streamline review. Predetermining planting scheme based on location. So that would be an example. That would be, if you're in a park, you can use these types of plants. If you're within a neighborhood, it's these types of plants. Just those small adjustments and small lists can really help streamline the designs. You're not getting, plants and materials that are off the wall, but also allows, some flexibility where you don't have to have very stringent design standardization. Outlining optional design enhancements or additions and the associated cost with those. So something as simple as an upturned elbow to provide that internal water storage layer within a bioretention, or implementing a perforated pipe, for future maintenance, that type of thing. I'll show an example of that in a minute. So bringing the design standardization to what is needed long-term can really help to ease maintenance. So maintenance is kind of the theme, because without maintenance, any investment within, to an SCM or an SCM program is for naught. So looking at how do we standardize maintenance, whether you're using details or just general guidelines, it's, really pre-selecting, what are the configuration and widths of the vehicles that are being used, what do our maintenance staff have available in terms of tools, and what kind of, safety allowances would allow them to access the site safely while also performing regular maintenance at, a given frequency based on what the O&M agreement was. And, so for this example, looking at a 20-foot minimum maintenance pad that had to be implemented within any sort of median green infrastructure that was implemented in New York City. This type of just basic requirement allows the program to have flexibility, but also know that regardless, your maintenance staff will be able to access the site and perform the tasks that it needs to. So how can we make better decisions? We've already kind of talked about it. Maintenance is key to maintain the long-term performance of these systems. And so it's really designing for maintenance in mind. One way would be to consider, like I said, the vehicles that are entering. So if you have a park, making sure that you're considering the widths of the adjacent pavement. Are there areas where we need to expand the pavement so that maintenance vehicles would be able to access it? Those types of considerations early on so that you're not, retroactively trying to adjust something so that crews can even access the site. Additionally, allowing maintenance to inform design. So allowing your program and what you're trying to achieve be flexible and evolve based on what your maintenance crews indicate. So, this is an example of a permeable pavement alleyway. And in early implementation, notice that the rough concrete that was, kind of bordering the initial part of the permeable pavement was actually collecting sediment. So then in subsequent designs, we actually adapted the design to have more pronounced grooves in it and reduce the amount of clogging within that permeable alleyway. So that was a way, talking to the maintenance crews, understood what they were dealing with, and then made the adjustments to designs moving forward. Looking at planting. So natural native planting, generally will have better outcomes regardless of where you're at. This was an example of kind of taking that approach, having a more natural planting palette, but, maintenance over time is something that really needs to be considered. So the picture on the right was the same site 7 years later where less frequent maintenance was occurring, and it's hard to even see that there's an SCM in place. On the flip side, in many locations, the public, especially if it's in an urban area or ultra urban area, the public may desire a more manicured or intentional planting scheme as compared to something with dense vegetation of native grasses. And so if future maintenance is reduced beyond what is required to maintain that manicured appearance, many of the previous benefits can be lost. And so you can see this picture on the left. Manicured, intentional planting. Picture on the right, less frequent maintenance, same planting scheme. So, bringing it all back to maintenance. This SCM on the right may still be functioning from a stormwater aspect the way that was intended, but public perception is also just as important when considering, how this SCM will work long term. Are you going to get a log of negative feedback from a neighborhood? Because that can be considered a constraint for implementing future SCMs in that area. Inlet configurations, something to think about, especially when you're looking at consolidating maintenance activities. You want your maintenance crews to be able to go out and perform maintenance as quickly as possible, especially in areas that may not have large maintenance budgets and perform those inspections. So understanding that a curb cut may make it easy to visibly see buildup of sediment, trash, but in some neighborhoods they might not want to see that. So picture in the middle is covering that curb cut. consolidating the trash and sediment in one location. But the balance of that is out of sight, out of mind. If you don't, have a very rigid or methodical way to maintain all of your practices, could an option like this really just prevent maintenance from being done, period. And then stone pads around outlet control structures. So looking at areas where you can make it easier to identify where the features are, what areas need to be cleaned, and making that very obvious to your maintenance crews to help prevent, it also helps prevent vegetation growing on and in the outlet structure. And then planning for future maintenance, which I mentioned earlier. So, in many cases, you perform the infiltration test, everything's going as planned, you don't need an under drain. So what happens in the future? The soils change, things surrounding the area changes, more development, higher flows. Is that SCM still going to be performing at the time that it was designed? And so one thing to consider is, where possible, implementing under drains, perforated pipes, using those options, but just, capping on the end. This would allow you to promote the infiltration into the ground, but knowing in the future, should site conditions change, you'd be able to open that cap, have water bypass, adjust for flows in the future without digging everything up or doing a complete redesign. And so we consider looking at full life cycle outcomes. When you look at the constraints, what you have, whether you're tracking it within a table, within an integrated dashboard, within just a database that you have in-house, looking at what are our options for managing the stormwater now, and what are our options, should maintenance become limited or our program so extensive that we have to reduce the maintenance frequency, what is the outcome of that particular SCM? So whether that's, deciding upfront to increase your green infrastructure SCM capture volume to maybe say 120% versus 100% of the design storm, knowing that in 10 years, you may be closer to still 100%. Consolidating maintenance, so using sumps, more additional cleanouts, having those labeled in a way that it's obvious to maintenance crews what they're looking at, utilizing opportunities for passive flow through when possible, and overall, what's the long-term perception? So it does all come down to maintenance staff input, regardless of the type of constraint, even if it's a utility. The people that are doing the work, having those conversations with them early about what equipment they will be using regularly, how the site will be accessed safely, record keeping, even communicating with your utilities to understand, if they need to perform maintenance on a line that's hydraulically connected between two SCMs, what type of tools would they be using to help prevent damage to your SCM moving forward. And then landscaping input, key for stormwater controls, especially those with greening features. So in closing, green infrastructure and specific SCMs do provide an array of tools to overcome stormwater challenges. And it allows you to take those tools, adjust and adapt them so that they can be implemented regardless of those constraints. Adapting designs through the planning, design, and construction phase is critical. Sometimes, as many of you may know, you start construction and there's utilities or tanks or something that you were not prepared for. So being able to make that adjustment, understand what options are available to you can really help proactively mitigate, having to remove a system or that sort of thing. And then consideration of potential future outcomes for those design elements and how that supports overall design efforts. Proactive consideration of SCM siting and maintenance challenges. That really informs the design process, and being able to look at those up front, understand what your constraints are and how common they are, allows you to set the stage for better implementation and growing your program overall. And with that, I think I caught us up some. Comments and questions can be placed in the Q&A.
All right, great. Thank you, Alessandria. There was a lot to cover in that topic, and you did a really great job. All was very relevant to the presentation topic, so thank you very much. Okay, we'll keep it rolling. Doing pretty well on time, a little bit behind, but so our next presentation is performing comprehensive underground SCM inspections and maintenance. And Sean Mayo is going to deliver that presentation. Sean is a civil engineer and partner at Gavel & Dorn Engineering. He's a graduate of UNC Charlotte and has worked as a civil engineer in the Charlotte metro region for the past 20 years. He specializes in water resources engineering, including stormwater, water, and sanitary sewer design, with significant experience in land development. He has also completed hundreds of annual inspections of stormwater control measures for both private and public clients, including Charlotte Stormwater Services. So, Sean, when you're ready to share your screen. Right now, I'm still seeing Alessandria. There we go. Sean, you may be muted.
Oh, okay, I think I figured it out. All right. You're seeing the regular screen, right?
That's right.
Okay, very good. All right, give me 1 second. Okay. All right. Well, as Craig said, my name is Sean Mayo, and today we'll be talking about performing comprehensive underground SCM inspections and maintenance. And the majority of my experience related to underground SCMs comes from completing annual inspections. But today, I don't want to just talk about, I don't want to talk in depth about just the annual inspections, but instead have a comprehensive discussion of inspections and maintenance that should be completed from early design and construction stages all the way through the lifetime of the project. These underground SCMs, they're extremely expensive to install, extremely expensive to repair, and maintenance is difficult if required. So hopefully some extra care during early phases of the project will ensure that the device is as maintenance-free as possible. The underground SCMs, they're really common in more urban areas, particularly in Charlotte, due to the buildable space that they save. So most of you would have walked over or parked on top of an underground SCM in your recent past without knowing it. There are 3 particular facilities that we'll talk about that all could be considered detention facilities. So detention is just water being stored underground and let out slowly back into the storm drain system or the environment. Sand filters not only provide detention, but it will also filter some storm water through a sand layer in an underground vault to increase water quality. And lastly, an infiltration basin will also detain water, but instead of discharging it to a storm drainage system, some of that water will be drained through the soil to the water table. Now, all of these devices can be constructed of various materials, but mainly we see large diameter corrugated metal pipe or CMP or precast concrete vaults and structures. So from an SCM perspective, underground facilities are unique because obviously they're underground, as their name says. And it's not that they're not performing the same function as surface grade devices. The problem is accessibility. So accessing an underground SCM is considered a confined space entry, which requires specialized equipment and training. Most property owners or property managers, most engineers, and many contractors are unable to complete this type of work for that reason. So even obtaining access to looking at an SCM from the surface is difficult because manhole lids can be heavy and require special equipment to open. So all of this is to say that inspection and maintenance of underground SCMs is not a do-it-yourself activity for a property owner and makes basic maintenance and inspection very difficult. So starting with inspections, there are 4 types I'd like to briefly talk about. Construction inspection in parallel with shop drawing review is critical to ensure that the design intent is met by the stormwater fabricator. Engineers should be involved in the shop drawing review at this time. Engineers should also be involved periodically during construction inspection to ensure that the installation meets requirements both from a structural design and a stormwater design perspective. The design engineer will also be involved in the final certification of the SCM upon completion of construction. And finally, the SCM is, once it's put into service, and from that point forward, periodic inspections and annual inspections are completed to ensure the SCM complies with required stormwater regulations. So for an underground SCM, it's not uncommon for a design engineer to obtain permits for an SCM facility. And then the owner will then send those design drawings to a custom stormwater fabricator. That fabricator will then modify the design as needed to allow for use of their typical precast vaults or some other stormwater system that they have designed or patented. In most instances, the changes are minimal. However, there are times when the changes where the change may look significantly different from the original design or have some modifications to the design. So if the engineer's original plan was complicated or not clear to the stormwater fabricator, changes are sometimes introduced into the design that have a big impact on the SCM function. So it's at this key point for the engineer to review the shop drawings and ensure that the construction plans matches the intent of their design, and also to ensure that the new design is maintainable. And so for the next few slides, I'm going to detail one example, although we have seen this on many projects throughout the years of our inspections. So above is an example of the issue that something that we've noted recently. The design engineer's drawing shown on the left shows a clean out for the sand filter under drain. And that's per typical design, where the under drain clean out extends vertically up through the sand filter, allowing for access if needed. In addition, upstream of that sand filter, a permanent wet forebay was designed that would capture sediment ahead of the sand filter. So for some reason, the stormwater fabricator, rather than follow the original plan, extended the clean out through the vertical sand filter chamber wall at the upper end of the facility. And it's unclear whether the fabricator understood that the area was to be a wet forebay. However, if the design engineer had inspected the final shop drawing for the sand filter, ideally they would have identified that installing the clean out in the wet forebay was not feasible. I mean, this installation not only increased the likelihood for the clean out to leak and drain the wet forebay, but also from a maintenance standpoint, the clean out would not be functional because the clean out would be under 4 feet of water in sediment. If and when the under drain clogs, there would be no real way to access that. So post-construction, the design engineer will complete an inspection for final certification. It's at the end of construction. Ideally, the engineer would have completed some inspection during the construction stage as well. And at this time, there should be no surprises regarding the design of the SCM. However, what we've seen is this inspection, or I should say, this inspection is most critical to protect the owner from future costs for maintenance and repairs. My experience has been that engineers do not take the necessary time to inspect a facility prior to signing that certification. Most likely, this is because of the unique nature of the underground SCMs. Engineers are not necessarily equipped to enter confined spaces and cannot enter the facility, which leaves them unaware of conditions in the SCM. And without proper inspection at this juncture, the owner can be left with SCMs full of sediment. They'll have poor construction that will lead to future maintenance issues and are not meeting the intent of the stormwater design. So every engineer, before signing off on a final certification, should really ensure that they or someone who fully understands the design intent of the SCM should thoroughly inspect the structure. So using the same example from the project a few slides ago, above are pictures of the actual installation. So if that engineer had understood the facility, fully understood that this area should be a wet forebay with 4 feet of standing water, then they would have identified that this open cleanout at the base of the sand filter was not only bypassing the wet forebay, but also eliminating any water quality benefit of the SCM. And the final certification should never have been provided by the engineer because the facility is not in compliance with stormwater regulations. An additional example of a device that was clearly not inspected prior to final certification is shown above in the pictures. Not only is there 8 to 12 inches of mud and debris, but there's also even old wooden pallets in the SCM. During our inspections, seeing excessive sediment in SCMs from the construction phase is extremely common, and this material should be removed prior to final certifications. It's not necessarily a design issue, but does relate to the engineer's responsibility at closeout. This is going to be extremely expensive to clean for the owner. As the engineer, you're taking on that liability by saying that the engineer is compliant. I'm sorry, the facility is compliant with PCO. One final example of construction issues, common ones, is the grouting of pipe connections. Every pipe should be grouted to prevent soil infiltration. However, due to the SCM being underground, the out of sight, out of mind mentality encourages cutting corners during construction. Again, I would stress that thorough inspections by the engineer of record should be completed before signing off on final certifications. Catch issues like this and others. Periodic inspections of underground facilities are difficult to do due to access issues, and sometimes it's not something that an owner generally completes themselves. Typically, underground SCM owners will hire stormwater maintenance professionals to complete those inspections and maintenance. So depending on the type of device, inspections should be completed quarterly at a minimum, or even more often for devices that have excessive trash, high sediment loads, or very small outlet control devices that are likely to clog. Periodic inspections, not typically a confined space entry, or they don't have to be, but I would anticipate this inspection taking place from the surface, provided there is a manhole located above the outlet control device. However, ideally, the stormwater professional is ready and available to complete a confined space entry if needed to remove trash or unclog the device. Annual inspections are required to be completed by a professional engineer as per city requirements. So as noted before, the annual inspection is primarily intended to ensure that the stormwater device meets city ordinances for stormwater control and water quality. It is not intended to be a full structural review or inspection. This inspection will note obvious structural defects. However, any major structural inspection should be completed in the design engineering phase. This inspection will be completed via confined space entry, provided the facility can be accessed. There are times during, due to excessive water levels or small diameter pipe, that manned entry cannot be made. So the intent of this inspection is to get an up close look at the facility to identify defects that will prevent stormwater compliance. Generally, this is excessive trash, lack of trash racks, clogged outlet orifices, and excessive sediment. Specifically for detention facilities, the goal of the inspection is to confirm that the SCM is in compliance with the stormwater ordinance, which primarily means is the device holding water as needed and then draining in an appropriate amount of time. The most common issue we're going to see is trash and sediment buildup. Trash and sediment buildup on their own does not imply that the device is out of compliance. All devices have some amount of sediment and trash. Looking at the SCM, we will assess the device based on the actual performance. Is the facility draining? Is there any clogging? And what is the likelihood that the device will continue to function as required? We'll also note or address some more obvious structural issues as noted, but it's not a primary focus of our review. If a device is non-compliant, we will note minimum required repairs. Lastly, we will also provide recommended repairs for a device if we note that common construction or design improvements could prevent future maintenance issues. Underground sand filters are non-compliant if stormwater is bypassing the sand filter or the sand filter is clogged or slow draining. Very typical bypass issue is when cleanout caps are not present on the underdrain cleanouts, allowing water to bypass that sand filter. We see this a lot on new construction where the contractor is neglected to install the caps. Less common bypass issue is the migration of sand and water through sinkholes down to the underdrain. Common cause of this is a separated joint of the underground underdrain pipe, which allows water and sand to enter into the pipe. This also can be caused by a structural issue with the weir wall that allows the bypass. Bypasses can be noted by channels carved in the sand over to a sinkhole and the presence of sand in the outlet control structure downstream of the weir. So assessing whether a sand filter is clogged or not is another performance-based assessment. In general, after a rainfall, rainwater should have drained within 48 hours. If standing water is noted for a longer duration, the sand filter is beginning to clog or has clogged and repairs may be required. So moving on to maintenance. Typical maintenance activities of an SCM are actually fairly limited and will mainly consist of periodic trash removal. As noted previously, maintenance is generally going to be provided by a stormwater professional. Maintenance by owners is difficult due to access issues. From an owner's perspective, the ideal thing they can do for maintenance is to prevent trash and sediment from entering the facility via good housekeeping, which consists of trash pickup, possibly installation of upstream inlet guards and storm structures that drain heavy trash areas like public parking lots, and ensuring that sediment sources are contained. Now, major maintenance and repairs of underground SCMs typically require vacuum trucks, high pressure hoses, and other heavy equipment, and are extremely costly. These major activities should also be fairly rare as long as the facility was cleaned at the end of construction. And again, the owner is practicing good housekeeping of the site. Additionally, repair of a sand filter is another major repair that could be required at some point during the design life of the sand filter. Typically, skimming the top layer of sand and replacing it with new sand will restore the permeability of the device. Limiting the sediment load to the sand filter via good housekeeping and the use of sediment forebays to capture heavy sediments will minimize how often that is required. So in the few minutes I've left, I'd just like to touch on some SCM design recommendations that hopefully will help with maintenance and inspection of underground SCMs. The main point being that good maintenance begins with good design. Making key locations visible from the surface, anticipating repairs and concentrating debris and sediment into accessible locations should be the goals of the designer. Regarding access, the engineer should anticipate the use of vacuum trucks and other heavy equipment for typical maintenance and cleaning, as well as major repairs. Ideally, paved access in the vicinity of the outlet control structure will be provided. Additionally, for sand filters, larger access manholes or hatches will be provided to facilitate the removal and replacement of that sand filter. So the number one maintenance issue with all underground facilities is clogging of the trash rack or low-level orifice, and then cleaning of that area. Access over the weir, directly over the weir, is critical for that. Ideally, the outlet control weir is accessible from both sides for maintenance and can visually be observed from the surface. Full accessibility to the upstream side is the primary concern to allow for trash removal. And at a minimum, the downstream side should be visible so that the inspector can confirm that smaller orifices are draining. In these pictures, we see two examples of good design. We have access to the outlet control structure in both situations. For the one on the left, although the downstream chamber is not accessible, at least we can observe whether active flow is coming from the weir. The picture on the right, this outlet control structure is ideal. Full access to both sides of the weir is available with manholes directly over each side, allowing for easy access and cleaning. So with the goal of limiting the amount of cleaning and clogging, I would just like to discuss trash racks and trash guards for a minute. Trash guards are essential for underground SCMs, and selection of a trash guard should include some thought about what size orifice you are protecting. I would recommend installing trash protection on all orifice located on the floor of the SCM, especially ones 6 inches or less. It's also essential for all small orifice less than 3 inches to be protected against non-floating debris. So the underground detention will see large amounts of trash, debris, and sediment. An engineer should anticipate lots of trash in areas such as public parking lots and install trash racks and ensure easy access to clean. It's surprising how many underground facilities will be without trash racks. Particularly the CMP structures seem to have a lot less thought put into this. Both these pictures are typical of what you might see in an underground facility. Heavy sediment and mud, with heavy sediment and mud. They need to be protected with a trash rack, ideally with access over the weir, in addition to the sediment removal after construction. Another common thing we see is the incorrect use of trash hoods. Shown here is a trash hood that does not have any holes or perforations to allow water through it, but does have an open bottom to allow water to pass under and up to the orifice. This functions like an oil water separator where floating oil and debris is held on top and removed or vacuumed out. And this would be appropriate for a larger outgoing pipe that will not clog if an occasional piece of trash slips by the hood. However, you have to remember that lots of debris like plastic bags, chip bags will not float, but they'll instead be suspended in the water column. This type of trash hood will not prevent non-floating debris from bypassing the device and clogging those smaller orifices. A more appropriate trash guard would be a wire rack or a plastic guard that can be cleaned and where you can visibly see if there is a clog. So the last slide and the last thing I'll mention is providing two examples of trash guards that, at least in my opinion, would illustrate what I believe to be the most ideal solution for protecting small diameter orifice from clogging. I've not seen either of these in use in the field, but these devices anticipate that clogs will happen, and they provide an opportunity for easy removal, cleaning, and then replacement of that trash rack. So, and all right, that concludes my presentation. I'll hand it back to Craig.
Okay, thank you, Sean. That was really good. You can tell you have a lot of experience doing and managing those underground inspections. Lots of good advice and really good pictures. I'm sure some of those were probably from our SCMs here in Charlotte. All right, so we have one final one. Looks like we are gonna run over a bit, so you know, if you can stick around past 11 for Q&A, if you're interested in that, we ask that you do that if you can. So our final presentation is water quality enhancements for stormwater wet ponds by Cole Hewlin. Cole has over 14 years, for over 14 years, he's been an integrated individual in aquatic vegetation management. He worked as a research technician at CPRO and then 10 years in the private pond management sector, where he is currently the Western Division branch manager for Foster Lake and Pond Management. He's the president-elect of the Society of Lake Management Professionals and has a BS in wildlife ecology and a minor in fishery science from the University of Florida. Currently resides in Stanfield, North Carolina. So Cole, whenever you're ready, you can take it away. Thank
Thank you
you.
very much, Craig. I appreciate everybody letting me be here, be a part of this. We want to discuss water quality enhancements for stormwater wet ponds. I just a few topics over this. We're going to topics of discussion, introduction of who I am, who I work for, overview of the wet ponds, algae growth in wet ponds, and then, of course, enhancing water quality using an array of different products and opportunities that we have available these days. Moving on, I do work for Foster Lake and Pond Management. We've been in business for over 38 years. We're a family of 30 employees and service ponds and stormwater devices throughout the Carolinas. In the West Virginia as well. We're also licensed and certified in multiple different aspects and stormwater post-construction BMP inspectors as well. We try to make sure that the bulk of our individuals, our employees, are all certified and able to, decipher the differences in all the stormwater devices. Moving on to wet ponds, just a quick, overview. Of course, they have a permanent pool of water. Their primary pollutant removal mechanisms are sediment and settling and pollutant uptake, particular of nutrients through biological activity in the pond. They are living environments, and with the ecosystem, you want to make sure that everything is functioning properly to do the proper removal of all these nutrients that are coming in through the difference of the subdivisions, the lawns, the fertilizers, and the business centers and the shopping centers. All these things can increase the amount of nutrients coming in regularly, especially after heavy rains. One thing to note is the littoral shelf, and all the plantings in there do help with mitigation of some of these nutrients. However, we can also increase this. One of the things correlated to water quality is excess algae growth. Poor water quality, is going to include low dissolved oxygen as the main driver. Temperature, higher the temperature, the lower the oxygen saturation can be in those water columns. High level of nutrients, of course, is also another poor water quality. The nitrogen, the phosphorus, and this is all again coming from the runoff, fertilizers, parking lots. The well water can actually be a very common, agent that increases phosphorus loads into some of these stormwater ponds. People don't like to see their ponds dropping. With us maintaining a lot of these, they'll actually put in wells, and sometimes these wells can be high in phosphorus and cause more issues with water quality. And then again, you have your other issues that could include excess animal activity like geese, or even downstream from a dog park. Can add all kinds of poor water quality issues. Just a quick types of algae growth we have, filamentous up in the top left corner. This can include anything from Spirogyra, Lingbia, all different types of algae out there. But it's a very common algae to see this growth with devices, as you can see, green lawns all around them. There's no vegetation in the water, just algae growth. This was one of the ponds that we had to maintain, and this is how we took it over. We have Phthalphra there in the top right corner, and that is a major problem in a lot of these ponds. The growth of phosphorus drives this algae big time, and it can overtake a pond very easily. Euglena is normally the red film that you see on the surface. That's on the bottom left, and it's again a common algae in this type. It's not going to cause it's not a terrible algae to have, but it does have a very aesthetic displeasing value to it, being red. Now the other thing is this blue-green cyanobacteria is the big topic right now, so everybody's talking about harmful algae blooms and the wildlife issues that they can cause, even the respiration issues they can cause in humans. We have to deal with this on a regular basis, and again, it's due to high nutrients levels and increased water temperatures. So what happens, what do we need to do whenever we see algae like this? It's always reactive treatments. You have to use your contact algicides and herbicides like copper based algicides and even diquat dibromide, all of which, can actually hinder an ecosystem if they're used improperly. You want to make sure that all these products are used properly and done by a professional, so that we don't, destroy the ecosystem around. So anyway, enhancing the water quality and ways to do so, kind of came to realization one year is just treat the source of the problem, try to be more proactive in the treatments. Water quality can actually, if you start enhancing water quality, you can reduce the amount of algae growth over time. One of the biggest things with water quality is increasing H2O. Increasing oxygen throughout the water column. This is going to require aeration, of course. Aeration is a very good tool in the pond management business. Not only can it be aesthetically pleasing, but it does enhance water quality if you're able to get oxygen throughout the water column. There are all kinds of products out there, and we'll go over a few of those in a little bit. The other driver is the need to reduce nutrients in the pond, particularly phosphorus. Phosphorus is one of the limiting factors that algae needs to grow. So nitrogen is readily found throughout, the air and everything else. So why not try to limit the phosphorus content? That could be one thing that we can attack with certain products. Again, there's an, aspect of reducing muck layers. We can increase bacteria activity. There are all sorts of, products out there as well that can increase this activity to help break down the muck layers and help reduce nutrients over time as well. Increasing beneficial plants. A lot of these ponds that we managed either don't have plants, they didn't survive after the initial planting, or they're ordinances where they didn't require plantings. Actually, just doing plantings around some of these ponds can really help increase the nutrient uptake. And then, the other thing is with all these items, if we incorporate these things, we can reduce the use of pesticides. You're not always going to stop their use, but you can definitely reduce it. Enhancing water quality, again, aeration. So we've found that there is a direct relationship between oxygen levels at sediment water interface and the water quality. The more oxygen you have over the sediments, the better your lake water quality will be. This is basically saying that down at the bottom of the pond, if you have low oxygen levels, your total phosphorus levels are going to be higher within that water column in that area. And all algae starts to growth on the bottom of the pond in the beginning of the year, and that's where it's mostly found. So how can we help with this? And that's the thing, is to add water circulation. So we want to get water circulated down to the bottom so we can increase those oxygen levels down there and reduce total phosphorus. All right, so we have surface aeration, diffused aeration. Both examples here, basically it's just a mushroom type fountain on the surface, moves a lot of water over the surface, adds a lot of agitation. Then the diffused aeration, it's actually better for getting oxygen down to the bottom of the pond. Why is that? Because you're placing these bubblers down on the bottom on the sediment area, and the bubbles are pushing up and they're actually rotating the water column and making it, go around so that you don't have a thermocline anymore, and you're allowing oxygen to rotate from the surface down to the bottom. Then, another option is a floating fountain. They're not always the best at adding oxygen, especially when you have a display. They're only going to do that top layer, but they do have an aesthetic value that you can at least get some oxygen added to these ponds, and also, aesthetically please the HOA that's around it, or even business park. They all have their issues. These are going to need a power source, whether it's solar or it's, actual power getting down to the ponds. One things that we notice is there's never power at the ponds, unless it's one thing that could possibly be a part of the, building process is getting power closer to the pond's edge so that we can actually get this aeration down to it. And then increase the water quality this way. So here's an example of what's going on when we, on the left-hand side, it says no oxygen. We don't have any agitation. We have no surface movement, no circulation. So we have bad water quality and it basically cannot sustain life. Underneath the thermocline, it's 0% oxygen levels down there. Your bacteria is anaerobic, so it's going to be slow to break down any kind of nutrients or sediments down there. You want to try to get oxygen down to the bottom. So what happens if we put surface aerators in there or even fountains? You have some better oxygenation at the surface. You have that agitation where the water, and the transfer of oxygen can happen. That still will be, still will have a thermocline that will not allow oxygen to hit the bottom of the pond, where we need that bacterial breakdown. If we have full circulation, say like a diffuser, you'll be able to get that oxygen all the way just about to the bottom. And you'll be able to get more increased oxygen on that sediment layer, increasing the bacteria and helping the breakdown of muck layers and nutrients as well that way. There is a new type of aeration that's come out, and it's fairly new to the industry, but it's actually oxygen saturation. So they're pumping oxygen directly into the bottom of the ponds, and it's at a slow rate that doesn't disturb a thermocline. The thermoclines can be highly beneficial to some of these warmer, shallower water ponds for ecosystem survival. But by pumping oxygen directly down, they found that it enhances the water quality tremendously and is able to reduce algae growth over time greatly. So other ways to enhance water quality, they have nutrient binders available to us, and this can include aluminum sulfate or alum. This is put out basically normally as a granular. They also have liquid forms of this, but it is a phosphorus binding product that is a flocculant. So as it moves throughout the water column, it just drifts down and settles out and pulls, sediments and phosphorus out of the water column. The only issue with this is it's easily released from the phosphorus bond, and the phosphorus can reanimate back into the water column. But it is relatively inexpensive and can be a useful tool when you're doing treatments on ponds and water columns like this. A new product that's come out to pond management is lanthanum. It is another heavy metal similar to aluminum sulfate, but lanthanum is a stronger bond to phosphorus. The only issue with it is that it is a heavy product, normally a granular product, and it is pretty expensive when you're discussing trying to, take out high phosphorus levels out of some of these ponds. And plus also labor intensive. Moving on into beneficial bacteria and enzymes, again, enhancing bacterial growth can really aid in the breakdown of muck layers and nutrient layers levels at the bottom. So, they have products that are muck reducers, then there's also enzymes, all of which basically increase the bacteria levels, beneficial bacteria that can do all sorts of things, and includes the breakdown of muck layers. They are slow working. It is a living organisms that we're relying on, and if you do not have the proper oxygen down there, it's going to take a while. But they can be helpful in the aid of pond management and water quality enhancements. But they can also be somewhat expensive depending on your goals. Using them as a part of the management tool, they become very useful and reduce products usage of normal copper herbicides and herbicides. Going into another type is polymer logs. These are available to uh, anybody, but we found that placing polymer logs near aeration or moving water areas can actually distribute the polymers throughout the water column. They help to remove turbidity and also can bind to nutrients, phosphorus being one of them again. By adding them next to an aerator or even a fountain, they can be spread out faster throughout the water. And you can see our before and after picture here of a sediment, infused pond that a lot of clay that would not just settle out. So we added these polymer logs to the diffusers that you see out there, and it sifts out the sediment and really can clear up that water to make it better water quality in general. Going to a biological kind of, in water quality enhancement is of course the plantings that we're doing. Most of these ponds, again, they have low planting densities due to either, improper plantings or just predation even. The geese can really take its toll on some of these ponds. By increasing the plantings and planting them with the plants that are going to survive, sometimes you can't get the normal planting to actually take. So you need to find the plants that will take in some of these ponds and their poor soils and increase those types of plants. They can help to reduce the nutrients and actually add, help with reduce erosion. The one thing I will say about plantings is, they do go dormant, they do, grow and die, so they can add to sedimentation. They will also increase labor. So these plantings, you don't want to go in and spray anything. There will be nuisance vegetation growing within them. A lot of times it's going to be a willow tree or creeping water primrose, and those items, can more than likely have to be hand pulled. Cattails are going to be another issue that can grow in these very easily and take over. So they need to be, hand wiped, each blade individually. So yes, it can increase labor. However, we're going after water quality enhancements, and you need to make sure that the plants are doing what they need to do. Floating islands, you haven't seen many of these come out yet. There are a few ponds in the Charlotte area that we know have these. They can do a great job of adding more water quality enhancements just by uptake of nutrients and filter out pollutants. They also reduce flows in some of these ponds with their root systems and kind of help the sediment to settle out faster. They are labor intensive. It's very difficult to reach that middle platform to pull out a willow tree that can be growing out of them. So they also break loose quite often. Some of these stormwater devices, they get a lot of water really fast during a rain and can break loose of the anchors, float to the edges, and then have to be re-anchored or moved around. Then they get really heavy, and they can also, if left unmaintained, can be quite costly to remove and replant. It's about every 2 years that they need to be replanted. So they are, again, labor intensive, but they do have their definite fit in this type of system. Again, in summary, enhancing water quality can be a useful tool to reduce the use of pesticides. Increasing dissolved oxygen throughout the water column will enhance water quality. A well-managed pond with a water quality enhancement program can be more beneficial to the environment overall. Downstream, that pond in general, one of the biggest things is just trying to keep our lakes and rivers, natural as possible, and reduce those nutrients coming from some of these lawns. Useful products are available to us to help remove these nutrients, and then nature can also help with water quality, whether it's bacteria or plantings. And with that, again, this is our team of management. I'm part of the Western Division here, and if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Cole. Are those your girls?
Yes, sir.
And it sounded like you were dealing with a needy cat.
I'm sorry, the dog just decides whenever I start talking.
That's what you deal with these
Yeah.
types of
Sorry about that.
environments. But thank you. I really enjoyed that. I mean, algae, especially that cyanobacteria, is such a huge topic right now
Definitely.
and very common problem. So very relevant. Thank you very much. So that officially concludes our workshop. I want to thank all the presenters again. But like I said, we did have a Q&A session. There have been some posted in the Q&A feature of this Zoom workshop that are being answered. You can continue to do that. But otherwise, David Caldwell, who is the Education and Training Committee Chair for the RSBC, is going to lead some additional Q&A, I believe. But I want to remind everybody before we leave about the certificate of attendance. If you want the PDHs, I'm going to go ahead and post in the chat a link to the form that has that. Just a second, and the form can be found on page 5. Okay, I just posted it. And you email that to the email you see there, regina.geyer@risingsolutionsplc.com. And that certificate will be emailed to you. And yeah, so I'll let David take over the Q&A part, and we'll wrap up officially, I guess, after that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Craig. Yeah, appreciate all the questions and all the speakers. We'd have a good little bit of questions coming in here at the last. Got one for Cole here. Cole, do you have a base cost or square footage for wet pond maintenance? I guess having a baseline cost can help HOA come up with a budget for the community.
Sure. It's a big common question, of course. And typically, an easy answer would be around $3,600 a year for a normal wet pond within an HOA, and under an acre. So as they get bigger or underlying issues that they could have, prices can change. Normally that price will include an inspection depending on the municipality. Sometimes it may be increased, depending on the regulations within that certain municipality. But 3,600 would be normal.
Okay.
And that's just for maintenance. Repairs and other things would be separate.
Right. And I think going along with that, I think in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, I think we use like a percentage of the construction cost or something for maintenance, I believe is what it is, 5% of the construction cost, I think. Maybe Jordan can answer that. I think that's how we do it. Let's see. We have one here. What vegetation works well over sand filters?
I haven't seen anything. They've tried Tip Tough on a lot of ours, and it doesn't do very well. Charlotte's, stricken with clay sediments. So just doing the riprap, the rock and the filter layer, it gets clogged fairly quickly. So the drought that we had last year just about took out every one of my grass sand filters, and it does have to be replanted.
Okay. Thank you. Here's another one about wet ponds. Says in Eastern North Carolina, our primary goal in stormwater treatment is to obtain 90% TSS removal. Won't diffusers anchored at the bottom resuspend these solids as they try to fall out through the water column? Seems like diffusers on the bottom completely negate the purpose of our wet ponds.
So with a properly established wet pond and a properly established, upstream area of ground cover, the diffusers placed in there are actually lifted off the bottom with the plates. So they do have an extension coming up a little ways. That's why you can't get completely down to the bottom with the oxygenation. However, there are certain instances where it has, released some sediments. Again, this is where the polymer logs help out big time to reduce that sedimentation. That soft clay sediment can resuspend, with environmental factors. But when properly placed and properly used, these aeration devices can really enhance water quality.
And let's see, going back to that other question, I've been corrected on what I said here earlier. So in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, we use a factor of 30% of the construction cost for maintenance bonds and that maintenance bonds for 2 years. So that's what we use for coming up with a maintenance cost, 30% of the SCM construction cost.
That can range wildly.
Yeah.
Sure.
Let's see. Are there any solar powered aerators out there that might be worth pursuing in terms of price, effectiveness, and maintenance needs? I've heard some mixed reviews.
So there are solar options. Now, the issue with this is, they're either battery backup if you want them to run 24 hours, or they're not going to run at night. And at night's kind of the most important time to have these running, as plants and oxygen and algae will take up oxygen at nighttime. I have not found a solar aeration that's cost effective and does what an electrical, running 24 hours can do.
Okay. Let's see, here's one. Is there a product name for the aerator with the polymer log shown in the Foster presentation?
I'm assuming the diffused aeration. There are multiple types of aerators and companies that make them. Diffused aeration is out there. We normally use a company called Outdoor Water Solutions. There's also Vertex and AirMax, and there's a few plenty other companies out there. The fountains and stuff, the Casco is another one that does fountains and diffused aeration.
Okay. Cole, you're popular. You're getting a lot of them.
I like answering questions better than I do presenting. So
Okay, well, I got a few more. What steps can you take to prevent litter, physical objects like bottles and trash, from accumulating in the pond?
You're never going to have, be able to stop it. They do, they have these things where they can put over their inlets, but they don't work. We visit our ponds either monthly or bi-monthly, and every time we're there, we're going to pick up trash. Every time we leave, there's going to be a piece of trash that's been blown in. That day. But yeah, it's a common instance. Everything that's rushing off the surface of the impermeable pavement is going to bring trash into the ponds. Having a good pond management company that helps with the removal of this trash is dire.
Okay. Let's see. Cole, was the aerator the option that provided the best water quality conditions slide?
The diffuser?
Was the aerator the option that provided the best?
Oh yeah.
water
Adding
quality
oxygen
conditions?
to the water column is going to be your best bet to increase water quality. It's like I said, it's not going to reduce all your issues. It's not going to take care of all your issues, but it will help to reduce and increase your water quality over time for sure.
And what are the polymer bags made of?
There's a array of different products that those polymer logs can be constructed of. Now we can actually take a sample of the water itself and the sediment within it, and they will test which polymer log is going to work the best. So there's certain different types of polymers that they put in each log to help reduce that sediment that you have. And they can correlate it back to that water sample that you give them. It can be a multitude of different things, but it's all environmentally safe. And a lot of times alum is one of the components in it.
Okay. Well, I think we've answered all the ones I see for right now in the Q&A, and we're about 11 minutes over schedule. So I think we probably should wrap it back up. Craig, do you have any closing comments?
Just another thank you to everybody for attending and those who presented and stuck around to answer questions. And someone asked, will PDFs of the presentations be available? No, but we will have a recording of the entire workshop on our website available after the first of the year is what Regina said. So be looking for that if you'd like to share with others. And plug for Charlotte Mecklenburg Stormwater Ordinance Workshop in January. So be looking for information about that as well. It's going to be a lot of post-construction stuff, but some other stormwater ordinance related information as well. Thank you. Have a great rest of the week.
Wonderful. Thanks, everybody. And we did get a reply from Bob. We had a question about how to connect with the real estate folks, and I sent the email. He had to leave earlier, but he did write back that the North Carolina Real Estate Commission requires all realtors to complete 8 hours annually to maintain their license. 4 hours in elective course chosen by the licensee. So a shotgun approach would be for today's sponsors or others to consider creating a class and submitting it for discussion approval to the NCREC. And this could be really oriented toward that commercial real estate community. So just a little insight on that.
Great. That's a great idea. Okay. Thanks.
All right. Thanks,
Bye,
speakers.
everyone.
Appreciate it.